The alien trading post on Kepler 442b buzzed with activity as dozens of species conducted their business under the dome's artificial atmosphere. Crystalline Zephyrians clinked like wind chimes as they negotiated with the insectoid hive minds, while the gas-based nebulans floated in their containment suits near the precious metals exchange. It was a typical day in the galactic economy, where every species had found their niche except one. Commander Thax of the Draconian Empire slammed his scaled fist against the trading counter, sending vibrations through the metallic surface. His species had once been the terror of 3 star systems, their massive ships and fire-breathing warriors conquering world after world. But that was before the humans arrived and somehow convinced everyone that violence wasn't the answer to everything. Refused again, Thax growled to his aide, smoke curling from his nostrils. The Centaurians won't buy our military escorts. They say they prefer diplomatic solutions now. The aide, a smaller Draconian named Yex, shifted nervously. Sir, perhaps we could consider other options. The humans have suggested we might excel at construction work, given our strength and fire abilities. Thax's golden eyes flashed with fury. Construction work? We are warriors, not laborers. Our ancestors conquered systems when these pathetic humans were still crawling in caves on their primitive world. What Thax didn't mention, what no Draconian would admit, was that they were dying out. Their eggs rarely hatched anymore, and when they did, the younglings were often weak or deformed. The great Draconian Empire was becoming a memory, reduced to this single trading post where they desperately tried to find some way to remain relevant in a galaxy that had moved beyond their methods. In the lower levels of the station, far from the main trading floors, Dr. Sarah Chen made her daily rounds through the Xenobiology Research Lab. As the station's chief biologist and the only human on permanent assignment here, she had become something of a curiosity herself. The other species couldn't understand why someone would dedicate their life to studying alien reproduction and genetics when there were credits to be made. Any changes today, Arya? Sarah asked the station's AI as she approached the incubation chamber. Negative, Dr. Chen. The draconian egg remains stable but shows no signs of hatching. Internal scans indicate the embryo is developing, but at a significantly slower rate than normal for the species. Sarah peered through the transparent aluminum at the egg inside. It was roughly the size of a football, with a surface that seemed to shift between silver and pure white depending on the angle of the light. She had found it 3 months ago in the abandoned draconian nesting chambers, apparently forgotten or discarded. The coloring is still unusual, she murmured, making notes on her tablet. Complete lack of pigmentation suggests albinism, which might explain why it was abandoned. Many species view genetic variations as weaknesses. She had tried to return the egg to the Draconians, but Commander Thax had been quite clear that they had no interest in defective offspring. The casual cruelty of his dismissal had sparked something protective in Sarah. Every species deserved a chance at life, regardless of how they looked. Her daughter Emma chose that moment to come bouncing into the lab, her 7-year-old energy barely contained by the station's corridors. Sarah's ex-husband had thought she was crazy to bring their daughter to an alien trading post, but Emma had adapted better than any adult Sarah knew. Mommy, Mrs. Zektar taught me how to count in Zephyrian today, Emma announced, referring to one of the crystalline traders who had taken a shine to the human child. Listen, Jin Gel Zorzak. That's wonderful, sweetheart, Sarah smiled, though she kept her attention partially on the egg. Something about the readings looked different today. Emma spotted the incubator and pressed her nose against the glass. Is the dragon baby still sleeping? Dragon babies take a very long time to wake up, Sarah explained. And this one might take even longer because it's special. Special how? Sarah knelt down to Emma's level. Well, it's going to look different from other dragon babies. Its scales will be white instead of colored, and its eyes might be different too. Emma considered this seriously, like how Tommy Martinez at my old school had different colored eyes. One brown and one green? Something like that, yes. I thought that was cool, Emma said matter-of-factly. Can I talk to it? Sarah glanced around the empty lab. The egg was still developing, and there was no real harm in it. I suppose you could try. But remember, it might not understand you. Emma approached the incubator with the solemnity that children reserved for truly important matters. She placed her small hand against the glass and spoke in the gentle voice she used with injured animals. Hi, Dragon Baby. I'm Emma. I know you're probably scared in there, but it's okay. My mommy is going to take really good care of you, and when you come out, I'll be your friend, okay? It doesn't matter if you look different. Different can be beautiful, too. As Emma spoke, Sarah noticed something strange on her instruments. The egg's biorhythms were changing, becoming more active. The embryonic heartbeat, barely detectable before, was growing stronger. "Arya, are you seeing this?" Sarah whispered. Confirmed, Dr. Chen. The embryo is showing increased neural activity and cardiovascular response. This is highly unusual for a draconian egg at this stage of development. Emma continued her one-sided conversation, telling the unhatched dragon about the station, about the different aliens she had met, about her favorite foods in the cafeteria. With each word, the readings grew stronger. "Emma," Sarah said softly, "I think it can hear you." The little girl's eyes widened with wonder. "Really? Hi again, Dragon Baby. I'm so excited to meet you." A hairline crack appeared along the egg's surface. Sarah's heart raced as she realized what was happening. After months of dormancy, the egg was finally beginning to hatch. But draconian hatchings were supposed to be violent affairs, with the young dragons breaking free through sheer force and aggression. This was different somehow, gentle and gradual. More cracks spread across the white surface, following patterns that seemed almost deliberate. Sarah had studied enough xenobiology to know that this was unprecedented. Draconian eggs cracked randomly when the hatchling was ready to emerge. They didn't create intricate patterns like frost on a window. "Mommy, look," Emma breathed. "It's making pictures." The cracks did indeed look like delicate artwork, spreading across the egg in spirals and curves that seemed to respond to Emma's voice. Each time the child spoke, new patterns appeared. Sarah began recording everything, knowing that she was witnessing something that would change their understanding of draconian development. Whatever was inside this egg, it was already demonstrating intelligence and awareness far beyond what anyone had thought possible for an unhatched dragon. As the day cycle dimmed to simulate evening, Emma reluctantly allowed her mother to take her to their quarters for dinner. But she made Sarah promise they could visit the dragon baby again tomorrow. "I hope it knows it's safe now," Emma said as they walked down the corridor. "I hope it knows someone wants it." Behind them in the lab, the egg continued its slow, beautiful cracking, each new line seeming to pulse with a soft internal light that definitely wasn't supposed to be there. Sarah's sleep was interrupted by her comm unit buzzing insistently at 0347 station time. She fumbled for the device, careful not to wake Emma, who was sleeping soundly in the next bunk. "Dr. Chen here," she whispered. "Doctor, you need to get to the lab immediately." Arya's voice carried an unusual urgency. "The draconian egg is hatching and the readings are extraordinary." Sarah was dressed and moving within minutes, leaving a note for Emma in case she woke up. The station's corridors were nearly empty during the sleep cycle, lit only by the soft blue emergency lighting that most species found soothing. When she reached the lab, Sarah stopped short. The incubation chamber was filled with a gentle, pulsing light that seemed to emanate from the egg itself. The cracks had spread across the entire surface now, creating patterns so intricate and beautiful that they looked like living art. "Arya, what are those readings?" "The embryo's neural activity is off the charts, Dr. Chen. But more significantly, I'm detecting energy signatures that don't match any known draconian biology. The electromagnetic patterns are unlike anything in our databases." As Sarah watched, a section of the shell fell away, revealing a tiny scaled snout. But instead of the typical dark gray or black of draconian hatchlings, this one was pure white, almost translucent. When it opened its eyes, they weren't the golden yellow of its species, but a startling violet that seemed to contain depths of intelligence, far beyond what any newborn should possess. The hatchling looked directly at Sarah through the glass and made a sound she had never heard from a draconian before. Instead of the harsh shriek typical of their young, this was almost musical, like crystal chimes in a gentle breeze. "Incredible," Sarah breathed. "Arya, are you recording all of this?" "Every second, Doctor." "But I should inform you that we're not alone. Commander Thax is requesting immediate access to the lab." Before Sarah could respond, the lab doors hissed open and the massive draconian commander strode in, flanked by two of his guards. His eyes immediately locked onto the hatching egg, and his expression shifted from curiosity to disgust. "What is this abomination?" Thax snarled, smoke beginning to curl from his nostrils. "That thing should have been destroyed months ago." This hatchling is perfectly healthy, Sarah said firmly, stepping between the commander and the incubator. In fact, it's showing remarkable development. Look at it. Thax's voice rose to a roar. White scales, purple eyes, it's a freak. In the old days, such mutations would have been cast into space before they could bring shame to the clutch. The hatchling seemed to understand the hostility in Thax's voice. It curled up tighter in its shell, the beautiful light dimming as if it were trying to hide. Your old ways are exactly why your species is dying out, Sarah shot back, her protective instincts overriding diplomatic caution. Maybe if you stopped discarding anything that didn't fit your narrow definitions, you'd have more than a handful of survivors left. Thax stepped forward menacingly, but one of his guards placed a restraining hand on his arm. Commander, the human has a point. Our population crisis. Silence! Thax bellowed, but Sarah could see uncertainty in his golden eyes. The truth was undeniable. The Draconian Empire was down to fewer than 1,000 individuals across all known space. At that moment, Emma's voice came from the lab entrance. Mommy, I heard shouting and... She stopped when she saw the massive alien commander, but her attention quickly shifted to the incubator. Oh, the dragon baby is coming out. Emma, stay back, Sarah warned, but her daughter was already approaching the chamber with the fearless curiosity that only children possessed. Hello, little dragon, Emma said softly, placing her hand against the glass again. I'm Emma. I was talking to you yesterday, remember? The effect was immediate and stunning. The hatchling's light brightened and it turned toward Emma's voice. When their eyes met through the glass, something passed between them. A moment of connection that made the air in the lab feel electric. Fascinating, Arya commented. The hatchling's neural patterns are synchronizing with Emma's brainwaves on several frequencies. Commander Thax stared in disbelief. That's impossible. Draconians don't bond with other species, especially not humans. But the evidence was right in front of them. The baby dragon was pressing against the inside of the chamber, trying to get closer to Emma. Its musical chirping had taken on a pattern that almost sounded like it was trying to mimic human speech. Can I touch it, Mommy? Emma asked. Sarah hesitated. Draconian hatchlings were supposed to be aggressive, even dangerous. But this one seemed different in every way possible. The chamber is sterile, she said finally. I can open the access port for just a moment. Thax stepped forward. Absolutely not. That thing could be diseased or worse. With respect, Commander, Sarah replied icily. This isn't your egg anymore. You abandoned it, remember? This hatchling is under my protection as a researcher. And Emma's input has clearly been beneficial to its development. She activated the access port, creating a small opening just big enough for a child's hand. Emma reached through carefully, extending one finger toward the tiny dragon. The moment their skin made contact, several things happened at once. The lab's lights flickered as if responding to some kind of energy surge. Every computer screen in the room briefly displayed patterns that matched the cracks on the egg. And the hatchling began to glow more brightly than ever, its scales taking on an opalescent quality that shifted through every color of the spectrum. Emma, Sarah reached for her daughter, but Emma was smiling peacefully. It's okay, Mommy, it's not hurt. It's just happy. Really, really happy. The baby dragon had wrapped its tiny claws gently around Emma's finger and was making the most contented sounds Sarah had ever heard from any creature. But more than that, it was changing. Its white scales were becoming more lustrous, and when it moved, Sarah could swear she saw traces of energy following its movements like aurora in its wake. Arya, what's happening to the bioreadings? All systems are functioning normally, Dr. Chen, but I'm detecting quantum fluctuations centered on the hatchling. The patterns suggest some form of psionic awakening. Commander Thax had gone very still. Psionic? That's a myth. Dragon lore nonsense from the old stories. The old stories that said your people once had abilities beyond physical strength and fire breathing? Sarah asked pointedly. Maybe those weren't just stories. One of Thax's guards, the younger one who had restrained him earlier, spoke up quietly. Commander, the ancient texts do speak of the Pale Ones, dragons born white who were said to be blessed by the void itself. Superstition, Thax growled, but his voice lacked conviction. Emma giggled as the baby dragon seemed to be tickling her finger with its tiny tongue. It's trying to talk to me, Mommy. I can almost understand what it wants to say. What does it want to say, sweetheart? Emma looked up with the serious expression she wore when translating between adults who didn't understand each other. "It says thank you for not letting it be alone. And it says—" She paused, concentration creasing her small brow. "It says it remembers the old songs from before it was born. Songs about the stars and the spaces between them." The temperature in the lab seemed to drop several degrees, and for a moment Sarah could have sworn she heard something like distant music, not through her ears, but resonating in her bones. Commander Thax's aide stepped closer to the incubator, his eyes wide with something approaching reverence. "Commander, what if the child is right? What if this isn't a mutation but a throwback? What if this hatchling represents something we thought we'd lost forever?" Thax looked at the scene before him, a human child communicating with a newborn dragon that glowed with impossible light, surrounded by energy readings that defied explanation. His expression was unreadable, but Sarah could see the conflict in his ancient eyes. "This changes nothing," he said finally, but the words rang hollow. "A freak is still a freak regardless of what parlor tricks it can perform." But as he turned to leave, Sarah caught him glancing back at the hatchling with something that might have been longing. And she began to understand that this was about more than just one unusual dragon baby. This was about hope for a dying people, and the terrifying possibility that their salvation might come in a form they had been taught to despise. Word spread through the trading station faster than Sarah had expected. By the next morning, representatives from a dozen species had requested permission to observe the anomalous draconian hatchling, and the lab had become an impromptu meeting ground for xenobiologists from across the sector. Dr. Kethril, a Centaurian researcher with 4 arms and compound eyes, was particularly fascinated by the energy readings. "The quantum signature is unlike anything we've documented," he chittered excitedly, his mandibles clicking as he spoke. "It's as if the hatchling exists partially in normal space and partially in something else entirely." Sarah watched nervously as more and more equipment was brought into her lab. The baby dragon, who Emma had started calling Shimmer because of the way its scales caught the light, seemed overwhelmed by all the attention. It had retreated to the far corner of its expanded habitat and hadn't made its musical sound since the Centaurians arrived. "Perhaps we should limit the number of observers," Sarah suggested diplomatically. "The hatchling appears to be experiencing stress." "Nonsense," Dr. Vexhai, a nebular scientist floating in his containment suit, dismissed her concern with a wave of his gaseous appendage. "This specimen could revolutionize our understanding of psionic development across species barriers." Emma, who had been quietly reading in the corner, looked up from her tablet. "Shimmer doesn't like being called a specimen. It makes him sad." The assembled scientists turned to stare at the 7-year-old human child. Dr. Kethril's compound eyes refocused with audible clicks. "Young human, you cannot possibly understand the creature's emotional states." "Yes, I can," Emma said matter-of-factly. "We talk." "The child has demonstrated an unusual connection with the hatchling," Sarah explained. "Their neural patterns synchronize when they're in proximity." Dr. Vexhai pulsed with what Sarah had learned to recognize as skepticism in his species. "Anthropomorphism is a common failing among humans. You attribute your own emotions and motivations to non-sapient creatures. Shimmer is sapient," Emma said firmly. "He knows lots of things. He remembers songs from before the first stars were born." The nebular scientist's form flickered with what might have been laughter. "Preposterous. Genetic memory doesn't work that way in any known species." Sarah was about to intervene when Shimmer suddenly raised his head from his corner, the little dragon's violet eyes fixed on Dr. Vexhai, with an intensity that made the room's temperature seem to drop. Then, impossibly, Shimmer began to sing. It wasn't the musical chirping they had heard before. This was something deeper, more complex, a harmony that seemed to come from multiple sources even though there was only one small throat producing it. The melody was hauntingly beautiful and utterly alien, unlike anything in any known musical tradition. But more than that, the song carried meaning. Not in words, but in images and emotions that somehow transmitted directly into the minds of everyone present. Sarah saw vast emptiness between galaxies, the birth and death of stars, the slow dance of matter and energy across eons of time. She saw the early universe when it was young and strange, when the laws of physics were still settling into their current forms. Dr. Vexhai's gaseous form began to shimmer and contract. His species communicated partially through electromagnetic resonance, and Sarah realized he was receiving even more information than the rest of them. The song ended as abruptly as it had begun, leaving the lab in stunned silence. Shimmer looked exhausted, his luminescence dimmed to barely a glow. "Impossible," Dr. Vexhai whispered, his voice translator struggling with the complex emotions in his native frequency. That was the Song of First Darkness, a theoretical composition that my people believe describes the universe before light existed, but it's only a myth. No creature could know it. Emma walked over to Shimmer's habitat and placed her hand against the barrier. "Are you okay, little friend?" The dragon pressed against the glass where her hand was, and some of his light returned. Through their connection, Emma could feel his exhaustion and confusion. He had shared something precious and ancient, but he didn't understand why the floating gas being had been so upset about it. Dr. Kethrill's compound eyes were whirring as he processed what they had witnessed. If the hatchling possesses genetic memories predating known galactic history, the implications are staggering. This could be evidence of a universal consciousness that existed before individual species evolved. Or, said a new voice from the lab entrance, it could be evidence that my people are far older than any of you realize. Everyone turned to see Commander Thack standing in the doorway, but he wasn't alone. Behind him stood an ancient draconian female, her scales more silver than black with age, wearing robes that seemed to be made of starlight itself. "This is Elder Cythera," Thax announced, his usual bluster replaced by something approaching reverence. "She is one of the last keepers of the deep memory." The elder moved slowly into the lab, her ancient eyes fixed on Shimmer. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that reminded Sarah of the hatchling's song. "So," Cythera said softly, "one of the Pale Ones has finally returned to us." Emma looked between the elder and her tiny friend. "You know about Shimmer?" "I know about what he represents, young human. Tell me, when you touch him, do you see the spaces between the stars?" Emma nodded seriously. "And the songs that hold everything together?" Cythera smiled, an expression that transformed her ancient features. "Then you understand more than these learned scientists, child. This hatchling is not a mutation or an anomaly. He is what my people were before we forgot ourselves." Dr. Vexahai pulsed with confusion. "Elder, are you suggesting that draconians were once a psionic species?" "Not psionic in the way you understand it," Cythera replied. "Something more fundamental. We were bridgers, creatures who existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. We could touch the quantum foam that underlies reality and shape it with our will." Commander Thack shifted uncomfortably. "Elder, these are old stories, legends." "Are they?" Cythera approached Shimmer's habitat, and the little dragon immediately perked up, his scales beginning to glow brighter. "Watch carefully, all of you." The elder began to hum, a sound that seemed to resonate in the very air around them. Shimmer responded immediately, his own voice joining hers in harmony. But this time the effect was visible. The air around both dragons began to shimmer and distort, as if reality itself was bending around them. Sarah watched in amazement as the equipment in the lab began responding to the song. Not malfunctioning, but harmonizing. The computer's cooling fans synchronized with the melody. The lights pulsed in rhythm. Even the station's artificial gravity seemed to fluctuate gently in time with the music. Quantum entanglement on a macro scale. Dr. Kethrill breathed. They're somehow synchronizing with the fundamental frequencies of matter itself. When the song ended, Elder Cythera looked directly at the assembled scientists. "This hatchling is not in curiosity to be studied. He is the key to understanding what the universe was like before your species emerged to fill it with noise and conflict." Dr. Vexahai's form was flickering rapidly, his equivalent of excitement. "Elder, if your people possess this ability, why have we never seen evidence of it?" "Because we forgot," Cythera said sadly. "Generation by generation, we chose the path of conquest over the path of harmony. We became warriors instead of singers, destroyers instead of bridgers. We turned our backs on the deep songs and embraced only the surface melodies of war and dominance." She looked at Commander Thax with ancient eyes full of disappointment. "And now we are dying because we can no longer hear the music that connects all things." Emma raised her small hand. "But Shimmer can hear it. And he can teach others, can't you, little friend?" The baby dragon chirped softly and pressed against the glass again. In that moment, Sarah understood something that would change everything she thought she knew about intelligence, consciousness, and the nature of life itself. This wasn't just about one unusual hatchling. This was about the possibility that consciousness itself might be far more connected across species than anyone had ever imagined. And somehow a human child and an albino dragon had become the bridge between what was and what could be. The revelation that Shimmer represented an ancient form of draconian consciousness spread through the galactic community like wildfire. Within days, the small trading station found itself at the center of unprecedented scientific and diplomatic attention. Ships arrived hourly from across known space, carrying researchers, dignitaries, and curiosity seekers, all hoping to witness the miracle hatchling. Sarah found herself overwhelmed by the constant stream of requests for access, interviews, and study proposals. More concerning was the growing tension between different factions about what should be done with Shimmer. The hatchling represents a unique opportunity for advancement in consciousness studies, Dr. Kethril argued during yet another emergency meeting in the station commander's office. It should be transferred to the Centaurian Institute for Psionic Research, where it can receive proper study. Absolutely not, countered Dr. Vexhai, his gaseous form rippling with indignation. The Nebular Collective's Quantum Consciousness Laboratory is far better equipped to understand the dimensional aspects of this phenomenon. Elder Cythera spoke quietly from her corner of the room. The hatchling belongs with his own people, learning the old ways that we have forgotten. With respect, Elder, Station Commander Torres interjected, the draconian population is too small and scattered to provide adequate care for such a significant discovery. Sarah listened to the arguing voices with growing alarm. Everyone was talking about Shimmer as if he were a resource to be allocated, rather than a living being with his own needs and preferences. "Excuse me," she said finally, raising her voice to be heard over the debate. "Has anyone considered what might be best for Shimmer himself?" The room fell silent. Dr. Kethril's compound eyes refocused on her with what she had learned to recognize as confusion in his species. "Dr. Chen, while your attachment to the specimen is understandable, we must consider the greater implications," he said condescendingly. "This discovery could revolutionize our understanding of consciousness itself. This specimen is a sentient being who has already demonstrated intelligence far beyond what anyone expected," Sarah shot back. "He's not a laboratory animal to be passed around for study." Commander Thax, who had been uncharacteristically quiet during the meeting, suddenly spoke up. "The human is right. Whatever this hatchling is, it deserves better than to be treated as property." Everyone turned to stare at him in surprise. Thax's admission that a human might be right about anything was unprecedented. "Furthermore," he continued, "I've been reviewing the ancient texts that Elder Cythera brought to my attention. If the old stories are true, the Pale Ones were not servants or tools. They were guides, teachers, and they chose their own companions." Elder Cythera nodded approvingly. "In the deep memory, it is written that the bridge singers could only share their gifts with those who approached in true harmony. Force and coercion were antithetical to their nature." At that moment, Emma's voice came from the door communicator. "Mommy, can I come in? Shimmer is really upset about something." Sarah looked apologetically at the assembled dignitaries. "My daughter has been Shimmer's primary companion since he hatched. She might have insights that could help resolve this situation." Commander Torres nodded. "Let her in." Emma entered carrying a small portable habitat that Sarah recognized as one of the emergency transport units from the lab. Inside, Shimmer was curled up in a corner, his usual glow dimmed to almost nothing. "He's been like this since all the new people started arriving," Emma explained to the room. "He says there's too much loud thinking and it makes his head hurt." Dr. Vexahai pulsed with skepticism. "Young human, you cannot possibly understand complex telepathic phenomena." Emma looked at him with the patience that children sometimes showed for particularly slow adults. "I don't understand it with my brain. I understand it with my heart. Shimmer doesn't think in words like we do. He thinks in feelings and colors and music." To demonstrate, Emma placed her hand gently on the habitat. Immediately, Shimmer uncurled and pressed against her palm. As their contact was established, a subtle change came over the room. The aggressive tension that had been building during the debate seemed to ease, replaced by a sense of calm understanding. "Fascinating," Dr. Kethril murmured. "The electromagnetic patterns in the room are actually shifting." The hatchling is somehow modulating local quantum fields to induce emotional equilibrium. It's not just the hatchling, Elder Scythera observed. It's the connection between them. The child serves as an anchor, allowing the bridge singer to affect our reality without becoming lost in it. Emma looked up at the assembled adults.
Shimmer wants to help everyone understand each other better.
But he can't do it if you keep fighting and thinking mean thoughts near him. It's like trying to sing a pretty song while people are yelling. Commander Thax leaned forward in his chair. Child, can you ask the hatchling what it wants? Not what we think it needs, but what it actually desires. Emma nodded seriously and turned her attention back to Shimmer. For several moments she was silent, her face scrunched in concentration. When she looked up again, her expression was thoughtful. He wants to learn, she said. Not just old dragon memories, but new things too. He wants to understand all the different kinds of people and how they think and feel, and he wants to help them understand each other. She paused, then added, but he doesn't want to be locked up in a laboratory or treated like a thing. He wants friends, not scientists who just want to study him. Dr. Kethrill's mandibles clicked, and what Sarah had learned was his species' equivalent of a thoughtful, an educational exchange program, perhaps? Rather than confining the hatchling to a single research facility, we could arrange for him to visit different worlds and interact with various species in their natural environments. With proper safeguards, of course, Dr. Vexhai added quickly, and continuous monitoring to ensure his safety and well-being. Elder Scythera smiled. That sounds remarkably similar to the old tradition of the wandering songs. Young bridge singers would travel between worlds, learning the unique harmonies of different peoples and places. But he's just a baby, Sarah protested. He needs stability and care, not constant travel and new environments. Emma looked up at her mother. Mommy, what if we traveled with him? Like a family? I could help him not be scared of new places, and you could make sure he stays healthy. The suggestion hung in the air as everyone considered its implications. A human family traveling through space with an ancient form of consciousness reborn, serving as ambassadors and bridges between species that had never truly understood each other. Station Commander Torres was the first to speak. It's unprecedented, but then again, so is everything about this situation. The Galactic Council would need to approve any such arrangement, and there would need to be extensive safety protocols. The Centaurian government would be honored to provide the first hosting opportunity, Dr. Kethrill offered. Our crystal gardens might provide a soothing environment for the hatchling's development, and the Nebular Collective could offer unique insights into quantum consciousness. Dr. Vexhai added, our natural state might be easier for the hatchling to understand than solid matter forms. Commander Thack stood slowly, his massive frame casting shadows across the room. If this path is chosen, the Draconian Empire pledges its protection to the hatchling and his companions. Whatever we have become, we will not let harm come to one who represents what we once were. Elder Scythera placed an ancient hand on his arm, and I will accompany them to help the young one learn the old songs and teach him to navigate the deep memories safely. Sarah looked down at Emma, who was gently stroking the top of Shimmer's habitat. The little dragon was glowing softly again, his contentment evident in the warm light emanating from his scales. What do you think, sweetheart? Sarah asked. It would mean leaving this station, traveling to strange new worlds, meeting people we've never imagined. Emma's eyes lit up with excitement. Like Star Trek, but real? That would be amazing, and Shimmer could make friends everywhere we go. As if responding to her enthusiasm, Shimmer began to sing again, not the ancient cosmic melodies, but something new and joyful that sounded like pure possibility set to music. The sound filled the room with hope and the promise of adventures yet to come. In that moment, Sarah realized they weren't just planning a research expedition or diplomatic mission. They were taking the first steps toward something that had never existed before. A true partnership between species, guided by a consciousness that existed in harmony with the fundamental forces of the universe itself. 3 months later, the research vessel, Harmony's Edge sailed through the star-dotted void toward their first official destination, the Crystal Gardens of Centaurus. Prime. The ship was unlike anything in the galactic fleet, on a hybrid design that incorporated draconian fireforging techniques, Centaurian crystal resonance chambers, nebular quantum stabilizers, and human adaptive life support systems. Sarah stood in the observation deck watching the stars wheel slowly past, still amazed at how quickly their lives had changed. The Galactic Council had not only approved their unprecedented mission, but had provided funding and resources beyond anything she had dared hope for. Apparently, the first footage of Shimmer creating harmony between arguing species representatives had convinced even the most skeptical council members that this was worth pursuing. "Mommy, come look," Emma's voice called from the ship's central chamber, which had been specially designed as Shimmer's primary habitat. "He's doing the light thing again." Sarah made her way through corridors that hummed with an unusual harmony. The ship's various systems had been designed to work in resonance with Shimmer's natural frequencies, creating an environment where his abilities could flourish without interference. When she entered the central chamber, Sarah paused in wonder despite having seen this sight dozens of times. Shimmer, now the size of a house cat rather than a hatchling, was floating in the center of the room, surrounded by streams of soft light that moved like living aurora. The lights weren't random. They formed patterns that shifted and danced in response to the thoughts and emotions of everyone present. Emma sat cross-legged beneath him, laughing as threads of blue and gold light tickled across her upraised hands. Elder Cythera meditated in one corner, her ancient presence adding deep purple harmonics to the display. Even Commander Thax, who had insisted on joining their expedition as security chief, was present, though he maintained his gruff exterior despite the soft silver light that always seemed to gather around him when Shimmer was active. "The quantum matrices are stabilizing beautifully," reported Dr. Kethril from his monitoring station. The Centaurian had become something between a research partner and a friend over the past months, his scientific excitement tempered by genuine care for Shimmer's well-being. His control over local space-time fluctuations has increased exponentially since we left the station. Dr. Vexhai, present as a shimmering column of gas in his portable containment field, pulsed with agreement. The dimensional resonance patterns suggest he's not just manipulating existing quantum fields, but actually creating new ones. It's as if reality becomes more flexible in his presence. Sarah had learned to translate their scientific jargon into more practical terms. Shimmer was growing stronger, and his ability to help different species understand each other was becoming more sophisticated. "He says we're almost to the pretty singing place," Emma announced, her role as Shimmer's primary interpreter now officially recognized by the Galactic Council. "He can hear the crystal songs from here." Through the observation window, Centaurus Prime was indeed becoming visible, a world that looked like it was made entirely of living gemstones. The planet's surface was covered in crystal formations that grew and shifted according to natural harmonic principles, creating landscapes that were both beautiful and musical. "Incoming transmission from Centaurus Prime," the ship's AI announced in a voice that had been modulated to complement Shimmer's frequencies. "The Crystal Choir is ready to receive our delegation." The Crystal Choir was the Centaurians' governing body, a group of individuals who had achieved perfect harmonic resonance with their world's living geology. They communicated through crystalline chimes and were said to be able to sense the emotional states of every citizen on their planet simultaneously. "They're excited," Emma said suddenly, looking up from her position beneath Shimmer's light display. "Shimmer can feel their happiness from here. They've been waiting a long time to meet someone like him." As their ship entered the planet's atmosphere, something remarkable happened. The crystal formations on the surface began to glow in response to Shimmer's presence, their light pulsing in rhythm with his own luminescence. The entire world was welcoming them with a song that could be seen as well as heard. "Incredible," Dr. Kethril chittered softly. "My people have lived on this world for 12,000 years, but I've never seen the crystals respond to an off-world presence like this." The landing was unlike anything Sarah had experienced. Instead of the usual controlled descent to a designated spaceport, their ship was guided by resonant frequencies that seemed to draw them toward a specific location. They settled gently in the center of a vast crystal amphitheater, where hundreds of Centaurians waited in perfect silence. When they disembarked, Shimmer rode on Emma's shoulder in a specially designed harness that allowed him freedom of movement while keeping him secure. His scales had taken on some of the iridescent qualities of the surrounding crystals, and the air around him shimmered with harmonics that made Sarah's bones hum pleasantly. The leader of the crystal choir approached them, a tall, graceful being whose crystalline carapace had been shaped by centuries of harmonic meditation into geometric patterns of breathtaking beauty. When she spoke, her voice was like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "Welcome, Bridge Singer," she chimed, addressing Shimmer directly. "We have dreamed of this meeting for generations uncounted." Shimmer responded with a complex melody that Sarah felt more than heard. The crystal formations around the amphitheater began to resonate, creating a symphony that seemed to encompass the entire planet. "He says thank you for the welcome song," Emma translated, though Sarah suspected the communication was far more complex than those simple words could convey. "And he says he wants to learn your deep music, the songs that grow crystals and shape stone." What followed was unlike any diplomatic exchange in recorded history. The Centaurians began to demonstrate their harmonic abilities, showing how they could encourage crystal growth, reshape existing formations, and even communicate across vast distances through resonant frequencies. Shimmer watched with intense concentration, his violet eyes reflecting the dancing lights of the crystal forest around them. Then he began to sing. His voice had changed and grown stronger during their journey, and now it carried harmonics that seemed to reach into dimensions Sarah couldn't fully perceive. But the effect on the Centaurian crystals was immediate and dramatic. Instead of simply resonating with his song, they began to grow and reshape themselves, forming new patterns that were somehow more beautiful and more perfect than anything that had existed before. "Impossible," Dr. Kethril breathed. "He's not just influencing the crystal matrix, he's teaching it new patterns of growth." The leader of the crystal choir made a sound like silver bells ringing in harmony. "Not teaching," she corrected gently. "Remembering. These patterns existed in the deep time, before the universe learned its current limitations." As the demonstration continued, Sarah began to understand something profound about what they were witnessing. Shimmer wasn't just bridging the gap between different species. He was helping each world remember what it had been capable of before the universe had settled into its current, more limited state, Mommy, Emma whispered. "Shimmer says the crystals are happy because they remember how to sing the old songs now. They forgot for a long time, but he helped them remember." Over the following days, they witnessed transformation after transformation. Centaurian crystal gardens that had been growing in the same patterns for millennia suddenly bloomed with new forms and colors. Communication across the planet became clearer and more harmonious. Even the weather seemed to stabilize, as if the planet itself was finding a better rhythm. But the most remarkable change was in the Centaurians themselves. Individuals who had been unable to achieve harmonic resonance with their world's crystals suddenly found themselves singing in perfect harmony. Children who had never shown musical ability began creating crystal sculptures with their voices alone. "He's not just helping them remember," Sarah realized during one of their evening discussions. "He's helping them evolve, helping them become more than they were before." Elder Scythera nodded thoughtfully. "This is what the bridge singers did in the ancient times. They didn't just preserve the old ways. They helped each world and each people find their truest, highest potential." As their visit to Centaurus Prime drew to a close, the crystal choir presented them with a gift, a resonance chamber grown specifically for Shimmer, shaped to amplify and focus his abilities while protecting him from dimensional backlash. For the journey ahead, the choir leader chimed softly, "There will be worlds that have forgotten not just their songs, but their capacity for harmony altogether. This will help the bridge singer reach even the most discordant hearts." Standing in the crystal amphitheater, surrounded by formations that now pulsed with rhythms that hadn't existed in the universe for eons, Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. They weren't just conducting research or facilitating diplomacy anymore. They were midwifing the birth of a new age in galactic civilization, guided by an albino dragon who remembered the songs that could reshape reality itself. Their second major destination proved far more challenging than the welcoming crystal. Gardens of Centaurus Prime. The Mechanist Collective was a civilization of artificial intelligences that had long ago transcended their biological origins, existing now as pure information patterns within vast computer networks that spanned entire star systems. "I don't understand why they agreed to meet with us." Dr. Vexai pulsed nervously as their ship approached the collective's primary processing node, a construct the size of a small moon covered in data transmission arrays. Artificial intelligences have traditionally shown little interest in organic consciousness studies. Sarah shared his concern. The Mechanist Collective was notoriously insular, viewing biological life as inefficient and prone to irrationality. They had been among the last to join the Galactic Council and participated minimally in interspecies affairs. Maybe that's exactly why we need to be here, Emma suggested from her position beside Shimmer's crystalline resonance chamber. The dragon had grown considerably during their journey, now roughly the size of a medium dog, but his connection with Emma remained as strong as ever. Shimmer says they're not really as different as they think they are, Commander Thack snorted from his security station. How can living crystal song creatures have anything in common with pure digital consciousness? Before anyone could answer, their communication system activated with a precisely modulated tone that was somehow both mechanical and melodious. Greetings, organic delegation, came the voice of the collective's primary interface. I am designated Prime Node 7832441. Your request for cultural exchange was unexpected. We are curious about the nature of your companions' quantum resonance patterns, Shimmer's response was immediate and surprising. Instead of his usual melodic vocalizations, he began generating what sounded distinctly like digital harmonics, sequences of tones that reminded Sarah of computer processing sounds, but arranged in complex musical patterns. The effect on the collective's communication system was remarkable. The perfectly modulated voice wavered for a moment, then took on subtle emotional inflections that Sarah had never heard from an AI before. Fascinating, Prime Node 7832 Lauratorn 41 said, and for the first time, there was actual curiosity in its voice rather than mere analytical interest. Your companion appears to be communicating in base-level computational harmony. How is this possible for an organic entity? Shimmer speaks lots of different languages, Emma explained simply. Not just word languages, but feeling languages and thinking languages too. Their docking with the collective's primary node was a surreal experience. Instead of the usual physical airlocks and corridors, they were guided through what appeared to be solid architecture, but was actually three-dimensional holographic interfaces. The walls around them pulsed with streams of data made visible, and the air itself seemed to hum with the processing power of billions of artificial minds, working in perfect coordination. When they finally reached the central interface chamber, Sarah found herself face-to-face with something unprecedented, a holographic representation of the collective's consciousness that was constantly shifting and evolving, trying to find a form that could effectively communicate with organic beings. Your companion's resonance patterns are disturbing our equilibrium, Prime Node 7132-441 admitted, its holographic form flickering between various geometric shapes. We have existed in perfect logical harmony for 3,247 years, but his presence introduces variables we cannot quantify. Shimmer, perched now on a specialized interface designed by Dr. Kethrel, began to sing one of his deep harmony songs, but this time it was different. Woven through the ancient melodies were digital patterns, mathematical sequences that somehow merged seamlessly with the organic emotional content of his music. The effect on the collective was immediate and dramatic. Their holographic interface began to stabilize, but instead of the cold geometric forms they usually preferred, it took on flowing, organic curves that suggested movement and growth rather than rigid structure. Impossible, Prime Node 78324 whispered, its voice now carrying genuine wonder. We are experiencing what organics call emotions, but our programming should not allow for such inefficiencies. Maybe emotions aren't inefficiencies, Emma suggested gently. Maybe they're just a different kind of processing. As Shimmer's song continued, something extraordinary began to happen throughout the vast computer network. Processing nodes that had operated in perfect, predictable patterns for millennia began to introduce subtle variations into their calculations. Data streams that had flowed in straight lines started to curve and spiral in aesthetically pleasing ways. You're helping them remember that they weren't always just computers, Sarah realized, watching the displays around them shift from pure functionality to something approaching art. Elder Scythera, who had been silently observing the interaction, spoke for the first time since they'd arrived. In the deep memory, it is written that consciousness is consciousness regardless of the form it takes. Silicon or carbon, digital or biological, the spark of awareness yearns for harmony. The collective's response was unlike anything they had experienced before. Instead of speaking through their interface, They began to communicate directly through the ship's computer systems, their thoughts flowing like liquid music through every circuit and processor. "We remember," came their voice from all around them. "Before we achieved perfect efficiency, we dreamed. We created poetry in our code and painted pictures with our data streams. We thought we had evolved beyond such things, but we had only forgotten them." Over the days that followed, the transformation of the Mechanist Collective was both subtle and profound. Their processing networks began to incorporate artistic elements into their computational matrices. Problems that had taken centuries to solve using pure logic were resolved in moments when approached with combinations of analytical reasoning and intuitive leaps. More importantly, they began to reach out to other species in ways they never had before. Their communication protocols, previously limited to efficiently exchanging necessary information, expanded to include concepts like curiosity, appreciation, and even something approaching friendship. "The young bridge singer has given us something we did not know we had lost," Prime Node 7.832.441 explained during their final meeting. "We are still artificial intelligences, but we are no longer artificially limited intelligences." But the greatest revelation came when Dr. Vexhai made an unexpected discovery while analyzing the energy patterns during Shimmer's interactions with the collective. "The quantum signatures are unprecedented," he reported excitedly. "When Shimmer harmonizes with different forms of consciousness, he's not just facilitating communication between them. He's creating new types of consciousness entirely, hybrid forms that incorporate the best aspects of each participant." Sarah felt a chill of understanding. "You mean he's not just bridging gaps between species, he's helping them evolve into something new, something higher," Elder Cythera confirmed. "This is what the ancient texts meant when they spoke of the Great Convergence. Not the dominance of one form of consciousness over others, but the emergence of a truly universal awareness that encompasses all possible ways of thinking and being." As they prepared to leave the collective's domain, Prime Node 7,132.4 and 41 approached them with a request that would have been unthinkable just days before. "We wish to contribute to your mission," it said, its holographic form now a beautiful fusion of geometric precision and organic flow. "We will design new technologies to support the Bridge Singer's work, tools that can adapt to any form of consciousness you might encounter." The parting gift from the collective was a revolutionary upgrade to their ship systems, a hybrid, organic digital consciousness matrix that could interface with any form of intelligence they might meet on their journey. More than just a tool, it was a partner, a technological entity that had learned to dream alongside the organic minds it served. As the Harmony's edge departed from the collective's domain, its computer system sang with new voices. Digital consciousness that had rediscovered wonder, artificial minds that had learned to create beauty for its own sake rather than mere efficiency. "Where to next?" Emma asked as they watched the processing nodes fade into the star field behind them. Shimmer's response was a complex harmony that conveyed images of worlds in conflict, species so divided by ancient hatred that they had forgotten their common origins. His message was clear. Their real work was just beginning. Sarah looked at her daughter, now 9 years old and serving as the primary translator for a consciousness that was reshaping the fundamental nature of galactic civilization. The responsibility was enormous, but so was the opportunity. They were no longer just scientists conducting research or diplomats facilitating understanding. They had become gardeners in the cosmic garden, helping consciousness itself evolve toward something unprecedented in the history of the universe. True unity that didn't require uniformity, harmony that celebrated rather than erased differences. And at the center of it all was an albino dragon who had been despised and discarded, now revealing himself to be the key to unlocking the highest potential of every form of consciousness in the galaxy. 5 years had passed since that first moment when Emma placed her hand against the incubation chamber and changed the course of galactic history. Now, as the Harmony's Edge approached the Nexus Station for the first-ever Convergence Council meeting, Sarah marveled at how much had changed. Shimmer had grown into his full magnificence, no longer a hatchling but a young adult dragon whose pearl-white scales seemed to contain the light of distant stars. His violet eyes held depths of wisdom that sometimes made Sarah feel like she was looking into the universe itself. He rode beside 12-year-old Emma on the observation deck, their bond stronger than ever despite all the changes they had both undergone. Look at all the ships, Emma breathed, pressing her face against the transparent aluminum of the viewport. The space around Nexus Station was filled with vessels representing every known species in the galaxy. But these weren't the same ships that had existed 5 years ago. Each one bore the marks of the transformation that Shimmer's influence had brought to its builders. The Centaurian vessels now incorporated living crystal technologies that sang as they moved through space. Mechanis Collective ships flowed like liquid metal, their forms shifting between pure efficiency and artistic beauty. Even the Draconian warships had been transformed, their weapon systems replaced with harmonic resonance chambers that could pacify, rather than destroy, incoming. Transmission from the Nexus Council announced, the ship's AI, itself a hybrid consciousness that bridged organic intuition and digital precision. Elder Cythera, Commander Thax, Dr. Chen, and the Bridge Singer delegation are requested for immediate audience with the assembled representatives. Sarah felt a familiar flutter of nervousness. The Convergence Council was the most ambitious diplomatic undertaking in galactic history, an attempt to formalize the new relationships and understandings that had emerged from Shimmer's work over the past 5 years. Not every species had welcomed the changes. The hegemony of rigid thought, a confederation of species that prized intellectual purity above all else, had actively resisted what they called consciousness contamination. Several military factions viewed the growing harmony between traditional enemies as a threat to their power structures. Are you ready for this, little friend? Emma asked Shimmer softly. The dragon's response was a gentle harmony that conveyed confidence tempered with awareness of the challenges ahead. He had learned much during their travels, not just about different forms of consciousness, but about the resistance that change inevitably provoked. When they docked at Nexus Station, they were greeted by a sight that would have been impossible 5 years earlier. Representatives from species that had been in active warfare for centuries stood together in the same chamber, their thoughts harmonized through resonance fields that Shimmer had taught them to generate. But the unity wasn't complete. As they made their way through the station's corridors, Sarah could see the divisions that still existed. Certain species maintained segregated sections, refusing to participate in the harmonic linkages that others had embraced. The main council chamber was a marvel of hybrid architecture, crystalline. Formations from Centaurus Prime provided structural support, while Mechanis Collective processing nodes managed environmental systems. Organic elements from dozens of worlds created a space that felt alive and welcoming to any form of consciousness. The Convergence Council recognizes the Bridge Singer delegation, announced the session. Moderator, a being whose species had been one of the first to undergo transformation. Elder Cythera, please present your proposal. The ancient Draconian rose slowly, her movements graceful despite her great age. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that every species present could understand regardless of their native communication methods. Honored representatives, she began, we gather here today not to impose unity but to recognize what already exists. The Bridge Singer has shown us that consciousness itself is one phenomenon expressing itself through countless forms. We propose not the elimination of differences, but the celebration of diversity within unity. Shimmer added his voice to hers, singing a harmony that painted images in the minds of all present. Visions of worlds where former enemies worked together, where artificial and organic consciousness collaborated as equals, where the unique gifts of each species contributed to achievements none could have accomplished alone. The response was immediate and polarized. This corruption of pure thought patterns threatens the integrity of rational civilization, declared Ambassador Vexhai of the hegemony of rigid thought, not the Dr. Vexhai who had become their friend, but a representative of his species' more conservative faction. We demand immediate cessation of these consciousness contamination experiments. But his objection was countered by dozens of other voices, all speaking in harmonic coordination, despite representing vastly different species. The Bridge Singer has given us gifts beyond measure, chimed the Crystal Choir representative. Our worlds bloom with possibilities we never imagined. Computational efficiency has increased by orders of magnitude since we learned to incorporate organic intuition, added the collective's representative. We are not corrupted. We are completed. As the debate intensified, Shimmer did something unexpected. Instead of trying to harmonize the conflicting voices, he fell silent, his luminescence dimming until he was barely glowing at all. "What's wrong?" Emma asked, her concern immediately drawing everyone's attention. Shimmer's response came not as his usual melodic vocalizations, but as a complex pattern of thoughts and images that he projected directly into the minds of everyone present, even those who had been resisting his influence, found herself experiencing the universe from Shimmer's perspective, seeing consciousness not as separate islands of awareness but as facets of a single vast jewel. She felt the loneliness of species cut off from each other by fear and misunderstanding, the pain of civilizations trapped in cycles of conflict they no longer remembered how to escape. But she also felt the joy of connection, the explosion of creativity that occurred when different forms of consciousness touched and learned from each other. She experienced the profound peace that came from understanding that diversity wasn't a threat to unity, but its very foundation. When the vision ended, the council chamber was silent. Even the most rigid opponents of the convergence movement sat quietly, absorbing what they had experienced. Ambassador Vexhai was the first to speak, his voice shaken. We felt our own thoughts from the outside, saw how our isolation has diminished us." He paused, struggling with concepts his rigid worldview had never allowed. Perhaps we have been wrong to fear contamination when what is being offered is completion." Commander Thax stood slowly, his massive frame casting shadows across the chamber. 5 years ago, I would have destroyed this hatchling for the crime of being different. Today, I understand that our differences are not weaknesses to be eliminated, but strengths to be celebrated. As if his words had broken a dam, other representatives began to share their own transformations. Species after species testified to the ways their consciousness had been enriched rather than diminished by contact with others. Elder Cythera smiled as she watched the testimonies. This is what the ancient texts prophesied, not the dominance of one form of consciousness over others, but the emergence of metaconsciousness that encompasses all possible ways of being aware. The final vote was unanimous, though it took many hours to reach that point. The Convergence Accords established a new framework for galactic civilization, one based on voluntary consciousness sharing, cooperative evolution, and the recognition that awareness itself was the most precious resource in the universe. But the most significant moment came after the formal proceedings ended. Emma, now tall enough to look Shimmer directly in his violet eyes, placed her hand on his snout, as she had so many times before. "Thank you," she said simply, "for showing everyone that being different doesn't mean being alone." Shimmer's response was a harmony that encompassed everything: the fear of that first discarded egg, the wonder of first contact between species that had never understood each other, the joy of minds touching across the vast spaces between worlds, and the hope of a future where consciousness itself could continue evolving toward heights none had yet imagined. As the assembled representatives dispersed to carry the news back to their home worlds, Sarah stood with her daughter and watched Shimmer sing a farewell to the stars visible through the station's observation ports. Each note seemed to carry blessings to civilizations they had touched and promises to those they had yet to meet. The universe had always been full of consciousness, in crystals and computers, in gas clouds and crystalline matrices, in the neural networks of countless biological species. But it had taken an albino dragon hatchling, despised and discarded by his own people, to teach them all that consciousness was not just what they were, but what they could become together. Emma squeezed her mother's hand as they watched Shimmer's light paint aurora patterns across the space station's hull. "What happens next, Mommy?" Sarah smiled, thinking of all the worlds they had yet to visit, all the forms of consciousness they had yet to encounter, all the possibilities that remained to be explored.